For the record, I don't believe in ghosts, but the first house my wife and I bought was an old two-story home from the 1910s. We couldn't find the realtor key to get inside, so we were looking around on the porch when I glanced upstairs, and that's when I see a hand pull away from the curtain, as if someone had looked down to see what all the commotion was about. "Oh, there's someone inside," I say. We're all calling out to let us in, but there's no answer. A few minutes later, we find the key and let ourselves in. Naturally, after shouting and looking around, we discover that there's no one else there. It's a beautiful old place with a grand library room out front, partitioned by these two pillars, so we buy it. After we move in, the neighbors come by. "Such a lovely house. So sad about the previous owners," they say. Well, turns out the couple who had owned both met an untimely end in a car wreck the day they signed the papers to sell it. Afterwards, we discovered the continual creaks and thumps of the house. If you were sitting downstairs, it would sound like furniture was being moved around upstairs, and more than once, my wife would come up to ask me what the hell I was doing thumping around, when I'd been sitting in my chair reading the whole time. Just countless things like this. Taps on the wall when you're laying in bed, thock 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 on the wooden steps leading up to the second floor all the time. Old houses make noise, they stretch and sink as the temperature changes, but I never told anyone else that. Guests would hear thumping in the hallway and be all like, "What was that?" And I'd arch an eyebrow and put my finger to my lips. The place had an interesting history. It had been the local Catholic church rectory, until there was some sort of scandal about its construction by the local timber company owner that got the resident priest literally sent to Mozambique. I was sad to leave it. Sometimes I still drive by and stop and look at it when I'm in the neighborhood. In the townhouse my mum and I used to live in, we had a ghost who we affectionately referred to as Mr. Ghost. One night I was sitting up in my bed on the computer and had this random coughing attack, so I went to the hallway where we had some cough medicine on the bookcase, but we didn't have one of those little measuring cups. I knew we had one in the medicine cabinet downstairs, so I dropped the bottle in the hallway, set it back on the bookcase, and went to get the little cup. When I came back, there's a cup on the bottle. I knew there wasn't one there before because I dropped the bottle and picked it up, and I would have had to pick up the little cup too. And I know I didn't see one. My mum was asleep and didn't know about any of this until the next day, and no one else was in the house. I figured it was Mr. Ghost giving me a hand, so I said thank you, took my cough medicine and went to bed. On another occasion, my sister and her boyfriend were staying with us for a few weeks, so they slept in my room and I slept on the couch. One night the light fixture on the ceiling fan above the bed broke. The round part covering the bulb fell off and landed on her boyfriend. The way they were sleeping, it fell straight down and would have landed on my sister, but it went sideways and somehow landed on him instead. On another occasion, my sister was home alone taking a shower. She heard someone with boots on walk through the room on the other side of the bathroom wall, and it sounded like they walked through my bedroom and went into the apartment next door. She heard something next door break, and our neighbor yell out, "What the hell?" Finally, during Mother's Day of 2013, my mother just passed away a week before, and I was sitting on my bed getting ready for work, thinking how the hell am I supposed to get through today, when I heard breathing, like someone was standing in front of me, breathing. No one else was in the house. I even checked under the bed and in the closet for the cat. No one was there. I know it wasn't my breathing because I heard my own breathing, but then this other breathing on top of it. I don't know whether it was Mr. Ghost or my mum's spirit, maybe both, but it felt like one of them was trying to comfort me. It freaked me out enough to distract me from the emotional pain. So, that's good, I guess. I lived in a house near several cemeteries and some railroad tracks. I would sometimes wake up and see shadow-like people standing in my bedroom doorway. I dismissed it as not quite awake brain manifesting things, and told my husband about seeing them and how I never felt unsafe, and after the first few times would just go back to sleep. One day he came home from work and told me my ghost hitched a ride with him. I had this dolly angel hanging on a doorknob that somehow ended up in the back seat of his car. It wasn't something that could have just accidentally gotten scooped up. We didn't see shadow people after that, so I guess something hitched a ride and got out of there. In the house I lived in when I was 3, things would come flying off the walls, and you'd hear someone trying to jiggle the front door open, but when you'd open the door, no one was there. In this very same house when I was 4 years old, I went up to my mum and told her angels were coming to take me away. She freaked out and asked me to tell them I couldn't go with them yet. In the same house, my mum asked a priest to come and bless it, to see if that would calm things down. He wouldn't even pass the threshold. When my mum opened the door and the priest looked at the house, he looked at her, back at the house, turned and walked away. And when my mum asked where he was going and if he was going to bless the house, he just shook his head and wished her luck. We've moved a fair amount since then, but it seems like things follow us. Here are a few stories from an old house that my parents still live in. My mum cleans a lot, and she sometimes cleans straight into the night. Well, one night she was vacuuming the basement at around 2 to 3 a.m. As she was vacuuming, she hears a very loud shh right by her ear. She turned around to see who was there, but there was no one. Needless to say, she stopped cleaning for the night and went to bed. There's also a laundry chute in the upstairs hallway. My dad bent down to open it and then quickly pulled up his hand away and stood up fast. He came to the kitchen where I was with my mum, and he said he saw a translucent hand reach at the handle at the same time he was. Then there was the time my younger brother was asleep in his room, when he woke up and saw a brightly lit translucent lady kneeling by the foot of his bed as if she were praying. He got really scared and turned away, and tried to fall asleep as fast as he could. Then there was the time my sister woke up in the morning and saw a shadowy figure of a man standing at her bedroom doorway. She rubbed her eyes, put on her glasses and looked again, but the figure was now gone. I was downstairs watching Thor with my wife and kids and some nephews of ours. As we were watching, one of the kids' electronic toys started making music. I went over there to shut the toy off, but it was already in the off position. That really freaked out my nephews. When I was a kid, we lived in a house out in the country. And before I started kindergarten, my mum decided she wanted us to live in town. So we bought a house in town, but kept our old house to rent out. I don't remember a lot about this house. A few creepy things happened to me, but my mum, on the other hand, had a lot of very unnerving things happen to her in the house that she doesn't like to speak about. We moved back to our old house after less than a year, and I remember one night when I was laying in bed half asleep facing the wall, and it felt like someone crawled into my bed next to me. I felt the blankets move and pressure on the bed, but no one touched me. I just assumed it was my mum and fell back asleep. The next morning I asked her why she came to sleep with me, and she said that she hadn't. On another occasion I was taking a bath, and always liked the shower curtain closed when I was in the bath, and I heard someone humming in the bathroom, and thought it was my mum and said something to her but got no reply. A few minutes later my mum did come into the bathroom and pulled the curtain back to check on me. I asked her why she didn't respond to me, and she said that she had been outside hanging clothes on the line and hadn't been there. These are the only things that happened to me that I can't really rationalize. My mum didn't work, so she was home a lot by herself while I was in school, and while my dad was at work, and the bulk of stuff happened to her while she was home alone. She never talks about it and is really traumatized, but I did get her to share one story with me after a few glasses of wine one night. She said the incident that made her decide we had to leave was when she was in her bathroom and trying to get out, but the door wouldn't open and the lights turned off, and she could hear breathing behind her, getting closer. She said she closed her eyes, recited Psalm 23 out loud, and the door opened. We moved out and back to our old house as soon as school let out for the summer. My mum said an older couple bought the house. Not sure if they still live there or not, or if they ever experienced anything for that matter. I would like to start off by saying that I have always been skeptical of ghosts. That is, of course, until our family moved into the house in January of 2001. 7 months before we moved in, around the 4th of July 2000, the previous owner committed suicide in my parents' bedroom. Every single one of my family members have experienced odd things happening that we all attribute to a ghost. For instance, multiple times a day, it sounds like the garage door is opening and closing without anyone being near it. Once when I was little, my mum and I were home by ourselves when we heard someone pacing on the second floor. It unnerved us so much we left the house until my dad arrived, as we thought someone may actually have been in there. But the craziest thing above all is one summer I was having a fire with some friends in the backyard, and from the ash, I see numbers start appearing in sequence repeatedly. 9, 3, 20, 36, over and over. It was one of the oddest things I have ever seen. It being early July, I immediately wondered if it had anything to do with our ghost. So the next morning I looked through the local obituaries from 2000, and lo and behold, the previous night was the 15th anniversary of the previous owner's suicide. Not sure what the other numbers mean, but my best guess is that it's a date. September 3rd, 2036. Ever since I was a kid, my sister joked about a little ghost boy watching her change when she was 16. My house is in a 4-house module, or complex. 2 houses on top, 2 houses on the ground floor, connected via an outdoor staircase. It's weird. Anyway, we always joked around, then my dad brought the house next door. We tore down the walls and we suddenly had a really big house. I got the first room of the 3. My aunt got the one in the middle of mine and my brother's. I remember the first of many times that my brother couldn't sleep. He stayed up for days and days fighting back his sleepiness until we just dropped on someone else's bed, mostly my aunt's or big sister's. When my mum asked him about it, he said he felt something in his room like a huge presence on his body, and that he wasn't comfortable sleeping in his room sometimes. When his friends stayed over, they were drinking quietly, or leaving his room to get another can or bottle of beer from the kitchen. But they always told us they saw someone sitting on the living room couch, something like a human-shaped shadow. Then it was gone. Stuff falls down from the shelves, and sometimes fruit goes bad really quick, like in the movies. We don't know what's happening, but my mum lights up holy candles once a month and has a gallon of holy water, just in case. My parents' last house was haunted as hell, and no one believed me until I moved out, but never fully accepted that it was haunted until later. I would mostly hear bumps and thumps in the night, but the first incident I remember really messing with me was when my mum and I were sitting on the couch and we heard silverware falling in the kitchen. When I got up to investigate, I found that the brownie knife that was placed in the bottom of the brownie pan was not only on the floor, but halfway down the hall, a good 7 to 8 feet from the kitchen. After that, a few other things started falling and moving unexpectedly. I was convinced, but my parents not so much, until my stepdad would sleep in my room on occasion after I left, which is where I experienced some of the hauntings, which were just thumps and bumps in the night, but they sounded like someone slamming a closed fist on the wall or ceiling. One night he moved to my room and snores very loudly, and he said he heard the bumps/knocking, and after he jokingly asked, "What do you want?" The room got super cold to the point where he could see his breath, and this guy just goes to sleep after. Then a few weeks later, my mum told me she rolled over in the middle of the night because she kept hearing someone whisper her name, to see a tiny Asian woman kneeling at the side of her bed, to which she responds by rolling back around and going to sleep. I don't know how they stayed there and just ignored that, but I was glad I moved out when I did. We bought a house from an estate sale. Had a garage that led into a laundry room, into a hallway and into the living room or bedrooms depending on which way you went. I was out of work and spent parts of my day watching TV in the living room. One day I heard the door from the garage to the laundry room open and closed and footsteps on the tile. I yelled out, "You feeling okay?" My wife would come home with bad headaches from time to time and I received no answer. I got up and went to the laundry room and there was no one there. Opened the door to the garage and my wife's car wasn't there either. Several times I would be in the living room and hear the door open and footsteps in the hallway, but I would always be home alone. The following story takes place in my old friend's house. A lot happened there. You see, when she was a child, she could hear footsteps when no one was around, and the humming of a small child. I didn't know about any of it until a sleepover when we were about 12. We were in the basement with 2 other friends, and she said that if you hear whispering in the night, to not worry about it, that there was an old man spirit in the guest room in the basement. She said he was cranky but not harmful. We're all like, "Oh yeah, okay, lol." Well, in the middle of the night, around 1 a.m, we're all still up and I looked over to my left, where there was a table set with 4 chairs. Previously, all the chairs had been tucked into the table. Now, one of them was pulled out about 2 feet and pointed at us, like someone was sitting there watching us. I pointed it out to my friends. The other 2 at the sleepover freak out. My friend, whose house it was just kind of like, "Yeah, see, told you." 3 years go by, and that was the only incident in those 3 years that I was around for. Something else I need to tell you was that when I was over and used the guest bathroom, which was in the basement, to get to the guest bathroom you had to pass by the inlet/door to the guest bedroom that was in the basement. It was just a regular room, but dear God, no one wanted to stand in that room long. It gives you this feeling like, I have to get out of here now. Anyway, I had to pass by that door, and every time I would hear a deep whispering coming from there, like 2 people talking back and forth in whispers. After bathroom, I told my friends what I heard, and she would just say, "Oh no, that's probably just my sister. She takes her private phone calls in there sometimes." Oh phew, it wasn't another ghost. I go upstairs to ask her mum for some pamprin, cramp medicine, and as I'm doing that, her sister gets home, meaning she wasn't whispering in the basement at all. Oh dear. This now is the real spooky stuff. It all started when we were about 15. I had an interest in the paranormal at this point after watching Ghost Adventures all the time, and I could always tell the nonsense episodes from the genuine stuff they encountered. So my friend knew this, and one day she calls up and says, "Hey, do you think you can get rid of the ghosts in the house for me? They're really freaking me out." She says they're opening and closing the drawers in her room, moving stuff around. A glow stick bracelet her boyfriend gave her had taken itself out of her nightstand table drawer and gone across the room to be sitting on her dresser in plain view when you entered. She would constantly feel the spirits just hanging around her. She could hear whispering coming from the walls when she slept. I think, oh yeah, I get to be the ghost hunter this time. So I go over to her house, put 2 quartz crystals from my collection near her front room to lure the spirits. This did not work, and sprayed her room with my mum's holy water that I borrowed. Right. When I was done spraying the doorframe with holy water, she stops and turns to me. She says, "Can you feel any spirits right now?" "I don't think so," I say. "Why?" She's dead serious. I don't think I've ever seen her this scared before. And she goes, "He's right behind me, right now." I couldn't feel or see anything, but just how scared she was freaked me the hell out. We both darted out the room. When we got outside, she said that she can't feel any spirits when we're out. I call my mum and says, "Hey mum, aren't evil spirits not supposed to be able to go through doorways sprinkled with holy water?" My mum kind of just goes, What? I explained the situation, and Mama says, well, has it occurred to you that it didn't work because they're not evil? Oh, right. I didn't think of that. My friend's older sister gave me a ride home since my mum was at work, and it's only 4 p.m. and still quite sunny. I'm home alone, I'm in my kitchen, and for some reason my dog won't come into the kitchen with me. So then my microwave, a 20-year-old microwave at that point, starts to scream. It wasn't on. I wasn't near it. The screen didn't turn on. It just started screaming. At first I thought it was the high pitch, that it beeps to let you know it's done, but it wasn't beeping, it was just a screech. Then it gets higher and higher. It was definitely not meant to make this sound. So I run into the dining room, grab the phone, and call my mother. Next to the phone on the dining room table, my school-issued iPad started doing the same noise. It was screeching while the home screen was flickering on and off like someone was repeatedly hitting the power button. 15-year-old me is thinking, I brought some spirits home. I grab the house phone, grab my dog, and bolt out the front door, call my mum from the driveway crying, telling her everything that just happened. She says that she'll be home in an hour after she finishes her reports. I stay outside on the driveway with my dog for an hour waiting. That night she calls her college friend, who's super duper psychic-y. I personally believe in like 3 psychics, the rest are hacks. She definitely isn't. So I sit down with my mum's psychic friend over the phone and tell her in detail everything that happened. Psychic lady says, the house on the hill used to be a barn. I have no idea what she's talking about. And I asked my friend the next day and she says her house was built on the foundation of a barn that used to be used for super rich people that owned all the land before it was developed into neighborhoods. They had racehorses there. Anyway, back to the psychic. She says, okay, so there are a couple of ghosts here because the house is built on a spring, and natural springs are good energy gateways for spirits. But the 2 you're talking about are an 11-year-old girl and her 6-year-old brother. They died in the barn from some type of disease back in the 1910s. They don't mean any harm. They're just playing. Be nice to them. Oh, okay, thanks. But wait, what about the ones in the basement? She said, I don't sense anything from their basement. She lives about a 6-hour drive away and none of the information she told me is available online. There's no way she could have found out the history of this house and known it was built on a barn, especially since she told me right away after I finished telling her the ghostly experiences. That would have only given her like 7 minutes to find this information. I reiterate again, there was definitely something in the basement, but by the tone of the voice I could tell she thought I was making those parts up. So what else happened there? Well, beside the basic footsteps in empty hallways when you're home alone and whispering coming from the walls, nothing. At a party she was having there was a glowing white shining orb that kept appearing and flashing over the couch. Over 10 people saw it and confirmed that they could see it. For some reason no one was freaked out by this glowing orb that we all saw, but we just carried on with our conversations. Finally someone asked if there was a strobe light on the ceiling. We took down the ceiling panels just to check to be sure. There was not. We all agreed it was probably a good spirit since none of us freaked out. There was also the shadow man, which I believe was the thing in the basement that the psychic couldn't really sense. Since shadow people aren't human spirits, we could see him walking around, sitting in the corner chair of the basement, and the lights would always flicker and sometimes shut off. But we just got up and turned off the light switch, and turned it back on, and they would stop flickering. That didn't really scare us as we thought it was just faulty wiring, until my friend's dad had a professional electrician down there to try and fix it, and he found nothing wrong, and they replaced all the light bulbs and it kept happening. Sometimes my friend would come out of the shower to see a figure standing in the bathroom staring at her. That scared her a lot, and it scared me to hear about it. She one time came out of the shower with hand-shaped bruises on her wrists, ankles, and neck. There's probably a lot more to it than that, but it's all I can remember. Thanks for listening. When I was young, I used to live at my grandma's. The house was tiny, but she wasn't living there then, and my parents were quite broke. My dad always complained that he had some bad feeling about the house. He felt like something was wrong. Well, one night I was sleeping and suddenly got awake. Nothing and nobody there, but there was something going on. My lamp was shaking literally from side to side of the roof. I got pretty scared, so I called my mum. She came in and turned on the light. The lamp stopped. When I told her what happened, she didn't believe me. Some years after, my mum was preparing a meal while my dad and I were watching TV. There was a sudden big noise coming from the bathroom. Now what was that? My dad went to the bathroom and found out that a big mirror that we had there had fallen, but didn't break. He thought maybe somehow the hook got bent and that's why it fell. He tried to move them one by one, but nothing was wrong. Everything was tight in its place. Shortly after, Mum and Dad and I were watching TV, and I was sitting on the floor playing with some toys. One of our decorations over the TV was a desert rose, a stone. For no reason, it suddenly jumped out of the TV, didn't fall, it almost jumped 2 meters from the TV, as if someone threw it, and it fell very near to me. My mum was shocked. No doubt why, my dad thought the house was haunted. Luckily, soon after that, we moved to our own house, and the weird stuff stopped. When I slept in the basement, I awoke one night at 3 a.m. with my cell phone light, and it being unlocked. It was a 2008 Blackberry. I look up to the door entrance and see a shadowy figure looking at me with the bathroom light behind them. I thought it was my cousin, but he later told me he wasn't home that night. I looked at my phone, and there was a video with a negative effect doing of what looks like sit-ups. I deleted the video and went to sleep. The worst was 6 months later, when I finally slept next to my parents' room because of the many spiritual encounters. While I was laying in bed unable to sleep, so I look out the window and a shadowy figure from behind my dresser runs out to my room. Annoyed, I turned to face the wall. Then I saw Medusa-type hair creeping up from my bedroom wall. Once I got to the top, the thing's forehead turned back around and I tried to get back to sleep. My older brother and his friends saw the worst. They would mention years later about how the cute little cow statues we had in our room would always move around at night. In 2003, I lived in the southwestern part of Virginia in the US, in a small mountain town. The town had been a coal mining town for generations and had been around since the 1800s. After living in the basement of my girlfriend's mother's house for over a year, we decided it was time to get our own place. The place we had chose to rent happened to be the second home we looked at. It was a 2-story brick home that had been around for well over 100 years. It was conveniently located across the street from a bank, restaurant, and grocery store. The current owners had remodeled the home to have an apartment on the ground floor and another on the upper floor. The apartment we chose was the ground floor apartment, and although it was $50 more a month, we didn't mind. We signed a 1-year lease and moved in. As we settled into our new home, things couldn't have been better. No one lived in there in the other apartment, and it was incredibly peaceful considering its location. For the first month, things were normal aside from the small little creaks and noises that were associated with the noises of an old home. One night, things changed, as fast as the flip of a coin. Sitting in our living room and watching TV, we began to hear defined footsteps walking around in the upstairs apartment. At first, I thought that someone must be moving in upstairs, and we both got excited to see who our new neighbors were. We decided we should go sit on our shared front porch and wait for an opportunity to introduce ourselves. After an hour or two, we gave up and went inside and bedded down for the night. For the next week, we continued to hear someone walking around but never saw our new neighbors. At this time, I worked a job that had me working various different shifts. One particular night, I got home and my girlfriend asked if I could maybe talk to our neighbor about all the noise we were hearing. I obliged and went to knock on the door. After knocking a few times, no one answered and I gave up. I stepped out front for a cigarette and had a realization that I never saw a moving truck and no new vehicle was parked out front. And perhaps even more strange, the lights in the apartment never appeared on at night. At the end of the second month, as I dropped off my rent to the landlord, I asked about our new neighbors, and was told the apartment hadn't been rented yet. I told our landlord about the noises. He said that wild animals must have gotten in somehow, and he would stop by and look at the situation. He came by on a Saturday, and we looked around the empty upstairs apartment and couldn't find a sign of anything. He told me it must be the noise of an old house, and I just had to accept that. I knew there had to be more going on, but I saw for myself that nothing could be making those noises. Life continued, and so did the footsteps. A few weeks later, we had some friends over for dinner, when the footsteps started again. My best friend started to remark about how loud our neighbors were, and I filled him in on what was going on. He was convinced that someone must be breaking into that apartment at night. With a little bit of liquid courage, we found a creative way to get the door open and went in to inspect. Once again, the apartment was empty, and I was at a loss. We locked up the vacant apartment, and that is when the conversation came up about the house possibly being haunted. And this was something that we would just have to accept. This conversation went on for a few hours between myself and girlfriend and our two best friends. In retrospect, I wish this conversation and exploration never happened, as the following day everything got worse. Our friends got up the next day and headed home. We decided to walk across the street to the grocery store and spent the next hour shopping. Upon returning home, we unlocked the door and walked into our apartment to discover every door and cabinet in the house standing wide open. This sent chills up my spine. From this point forward, we had a routine of checking everything before we left home. Every time we came home, everything was wrong. We experienced doors being opened that were closed, and lights or fans would turn on or off on their own. This wasn't an electrical issue, as the switches themselves would be flipped. The more that this happened, the more concerned we became. But we were under a lease, and although the events were strange, it didn't seem malicious. So, we stayed. As days went on, it escalated. One evening I was sitting in our spare bedroom, which is where our computer is located. My girlfriend comes walking in and asks what I need. Me being confused by this, I ask what she means, and she says she heard me call her name. I told her that I had not called for her, and she accused me of trying to prank or scare her. The following night, I'm back in the spare bedroom, and I hear her call my name. I got up and went to see what she needed. She hadn't called me and again accused me of trying to scare her. At this point, I'm starting to get really concerned, as disembodied voices can't be a good thing. This continued for a long time as we lived there, and it got to the point that my girlfriend would say my name and I would ignore her, as I thought it wouldn't be her at first. For most, this probably would have been enough, but yet we stayed. After about 4 months of living there, we received a knock at the door. I answered and was greeted by a nice lady that was around the same age as myself and my girlfriend. She stated that she had lived there before the remodeling, and how much nicer the apartment looks. We agreed that it was nice, but asked her if she ever experienced anything odd while living there. She quite frankly said, "Oh, you mean the ghosts?" Yes. We were talking about ghosts. She stated that the house was definitely haunted, and she used to contact the ghosts on a Ouija board when she lived there. Then she asks if we would be willing to move into the upstairs apartment and let her have our apartment, as she wanted to move back to the home, but couldn't handle the stairs due to her being pregnant. I politely declined, as my girlfriend was partially disabled after a car accident, and we chose this apartment specifically due to that. I could tell the girl was disappointed in hearing this, but she was cordial and gave us her number in case we changed our minds or if we decided to move, so that we could let her know. For the next month, things continued. They didn't escalate, but didn't get better either. At this time, the girl who appeared in our door a month ago was back, and she informed us that she was moving into the upstairs apartment and appealed to us again to switch apartment. We politely declined. She proceeded to move in. For the next month, things seemed to be getting better. Neither of us heard the voices, the issues with the doors and lights stopped, and any footsteps upstairs could now be justified. Just as we got used to normal life in the house, the activity started again. But now it was worse than ever. Now we had to deal with all the issues from before, and now new things were happening too. At times, you would feel breathing on the back of your neck, only for no one to be behind you. We started seeing shadows move out of the corner of our eyes, and began to have issues with light bulbs burning out prematurely, and batteries in devices draining at an unexplainable rate. At this point, we had less than 6 months left on our lease, and decided that we were moving when our lease ended. The experience we had in this apartment had put a massive strain on our relationship. At this point in time, my girlfriend was doing everything in her power to not stay in the house alone while I was working. On multiple occasions, she went to her mum's house and stayed there for days at a time. Every time she stayed at her mum's, she asked me to stay with her instead of staying in the house alone, but that would have added an hour to my commute each day. I would be lying if I said I wasn't scared, but I did it anyway. One morning I woke up after a long and mostly sleepless night. As I lay in bed trying to wake up, I hear footsteps in my apartment, and I know that I'm home alone. As I quietly get out of bed, I see my girlfriend walk past the bedroom door. This surprised me, as I didn't expect her to be there. I get up and walk in to find out what she is doing home, and realize that she isn't there. I frantically call her and explain that I just saw her in the apartment. She tries to calm me down, but explains that it wasn't her, as she was still at her mum's house over half-hour away. Now I am scared and feeling alone. I decided this was too much and appealed to my girlfriend to please come and stay with me. I wouldn't have the strength to do it alone. She declined and said that the ghosts and/or demons don't care about numbers, and to deal with my stress I turned to smoking weed so that I could relax. But it didn't relax me at all. If anything, it only elevated my anxiety. It did, however, help me sleep, so I made it a routine before going to bed. One night, the guy who I used to buy my green off stopped by to drop some off. I gave him my address and told him to knock when he got out there. Instead of getting a knock on the door, I get a phone call from him. He says that he's out front, and that I shouldn't be sitting at home alone, and I should come hang out with him for a while. I agree and head out the door to meet him, get in his car, and as we pull away, he tells me to move out of that place now. I of course asked him why, and he said that if he told me everything he knew about that place, I would never step foot in there again. I pushed for more, but he wouldn't tell me. I am now truly terrified, but also curious as to what happened in the house. At this point, I had 2 months left on the lease. I'm spending every night online looking for info about the house, and one night a guy I work with came by to help me search. I was amazed how much he helped me discover in such a short period of time. We found the age of the house, a picture of the home that was so old the main street in front of my house wasn't a road but instead a railroad track. We also found a news article talking about a fire in the house and the death of the occupant during the fire. Once we found this article and started to read it, we both began to hear the voices of what sounded like 10 kids playing on my front porch. I jumped up to look to see what was going on, and the moment I opened the front door, the noise stopped, and obviously, there was no one there. My friend from work was so freaked out by this he left immediately, and refused to ever step foot in the house again. At this point, I am now volunteering for overtime, just so that I don't have to be home. One day I came home to find a moving truck sitting out front, and my upstairs neighbor was moving out, as the stairs were adding complications to her pregnancy. She informed me her mother would be by the following day to pick up the last few items that were left. This night was strange due to how peaceful everything suddenly became. No noise, no voices, nothing. That had to be the best night's sleep I'd had in ages. The following day comes and I'm outside mowing the lawn when the mother of the other tenant arrives. I'm greeted by her and we talk briefly about her daughter and the soon-to-be baby. After a few moments we parted ways and she went inside to gather the rest of her daughter's belongings. I offered to help, but she declined, so I decided to stick close by just in case. After 2 trips to her car, she looked at me and stated that she only had a few pillows left to load up, and how she couldn't wait to walk out of that creepy house for the final time. We had conversations previously about the haunting, you see. About 2 minutes after she went inside, I heard a scream and the sound of something tumbling down the steps. I went to investigate. The mother had apparently fallen down the steps. As I went to help her, she asked me to get her away from the house and said something forcefully pushed her down the steps. I helped her to the car, and she asked if I could grab the pillows that she dropped as she fell. She stated that if I didn't feel comfortable, that they could just stay behind. Attempting to be Mr. Macho Man, I told her I'd get them for her and proceeded back in. I reached the top of the stairs, grabbed the pillows and ran back down, and I slammed the door closed and returned to the mother. She was visibly shaken and had a bruise appearing, and I asked if she wanted to go to the hospital, but she declined and asked if I would drive her and her car home. She said that she would have her husband bring me back. I knew she was in no shape to drive, so agreed, and after a short 10-minute journey I dropped her off and her husband returned me to the house. Now I really am alone in the house, and I know it can hurt people. That night before I went to bed, I stepped out on the front porch for a cigarette. As I go back inside, I notice the door to the upstairs apartment is standing wide open. One half of me wanted me to just pull the door closed, while the other half of me thought I needed to make sure no one was up there. I knew that I had closed the door earlier, and I feel like, if it had been open, that I would have noticed during one of my many times outside that evening. Ultimately, I decided to go upstairs and check everything out. As soon as I arrived to the top of the stairs, I hear an unnatural voice say, "Leave." I ran down the stairs as fast as humanly possible, locked the door to the upstairs apartment and returned to my apartment more scared than I have ever been. After tossing and turning for several hours, I finally managed to fall asleep. When I awoke the next day, my front door was standing wide open. I had 2 locks, one on the doorknob and a deadbolt that could only be operated from the inside of the apartment. Both locks were in the locked position, yet the door was standing wide open. I'm losing my mind at this point. Having around 5 weeks left on the lease, I don't feel safe here at all. I know I'm not spending an entire day in the house alone, so I decided to shower and get ready to leave for the day. When I turned the water on, nothing happened though. I called the landlord, as water was included in the rent. I went to the back porch to call him while I smoked and realized that the stairwell going into the basement is filled with water. I called the landlord and he states he's out of town and that he keeps a key to the basement hidden in each of the apartments in case of emergency. I get the key, shut off the water to the house, and while doing so realized that a plastic or PVC pipe had broken. I knew I could fix it, so I offered to do so. The hour that I spent in that basement was horrible. Nothing happened while down there, but I was totally creeped out. I got a very strange feeling that I was being watched, or that something was going to jump out and attack me. I finished the job, and finally got my shower. I decided to go to my girlfriend's mum's house for the night as I was far too stressed. The following day after I got off work, I went back to the apartment with a realization that I only have a month left in that place. I had dinner that night, sat down and watched TV, and in the middle of my show my TV went black. Then it flashed white, then it all went black. All for the letters D-I-E. This lasted for about 5 seconds and the TV powered off on its own, and then would not switch back on. The following day I dropped the TV off at a repair shop on my way back to work. The TV was just a little over a year old, and after I got off I swung by the repair shop and was informed they couldn't find anything technically wrong with it, but that it wouldn't power on. This was the final straw. The following day I went to the bank and applied for a small home loan that was approved. I only entered that apartment one more time, the day I moved out. The experiences I had there have stuck with me. And although I have lived in many different places in my life, no place sticks in my mind like that one does. I feel lucky that I was never physically hurt, but the mental toll of something like this can stick with you forever.